If I can't have him, then no one will. Those were the final chilling words whispered by 64-year-old Margaret Trent, a woman once known as a loving grandmother and devoted caretaker, now remembered as the unlikely face of a haunting tragedy. She stood motionless in her modest Oregon kitchen, blood on her hands, her breath shallow, her expression eerily calm. At her feet lay a young man lifeless. But he wasn't a burglar. He wasn't a stranger. He wasn't even an old flame. He was her granddaughter's boyfriend. And this wasn't a spontaneous act of rage. No, this was something far more disturbing. This was a crime nourished in silence, growing in the shadows of obsession. An obsession that slowly corrupted a woman once seen as nurturing, selfless, and safe. This was a story of forbidden longing, twisted affection, and an unsettling betrayal that would tear a family apart and shake an entire community to its core. Ash Grove, Oregon. Population, 6,117. A town where the loudest sound on a Friday night is the high school marching band. Where folks leave their doors unlocked. And your neighbor knows the name of your dog. A place where tragedy is supposed to be something you hear about on the news, not something that plays out just down the street. But on a cold spring morning, that illusion of safety was shattered forever. Police responded to a call from a quiet residential street, just blocks from the town square. Inside the small two-bedroom home of Margaret Trent, they discovered the body of 22-year-old Tyler Dawson. Stab wounds to the chest. No signs of a break-in. No signs of struggle. And no sign of guilt. Just Margaret standing there like a porcelain doll in a house full of blood. Now let's back up. Because to understand this crime, you need to understand Margaret Trent. She wasn't the monster hiding under the bed. She was the bed. The blanket. The hot cocoa on a rainy day. The guardian who raised her granddaughter Lila after a tragic car crash claimed the girl's parents. To the community, Margaret was a hero. A grieving mother. A loving grandmother. A woman who gave everything to ensure Lila had a future. But somewhere along the way, Margaret's love twisted into control. And her protection turned into possession. Enter Tyler Dawson. A charming, kind-hearted college student with bright eyes and big dreams. He wanted to be a firefighter. He loved hiking dogs and most of all, Lila. They met in freshman year and were inseparable from the start. Young love. Pure, hopeful, and uncomplicated. At least, at first. When Tyler first met Margaret, she welcomed him with open arms. She was thrilled, even flattered, that her granddaughter had found someone respectful and grounded. But admiration soon became fixation. She began asking Tyler to stop by without Lila. She'd text him questions that felt just a little too personal. Compliment his appearance. Cook for him. Gift him books, cologne, even an old wristwatch she claimed belonged to her late husband. Tyler was polite but increasingly uncomfortable. Still, he didn't want to make things weird. After all, this was Lila's grandmother. But what he didn't realize was that Margaret had already started building a world where Tyler wasn't Lila's. He was hers. Margaret began journaling, pages upon pages of handwritten fantasies. In them, she imagined Tyler leaving Lila, confessing his feelings, calling her his real soulmate. She clipped photos from his social media, printed texts and circled his words. And in the privacy of her bedroom, she rewrote reality until it told the story she wanted. But reality has a cruel way of crashing back in. On March 9, 2022, Margaret invited Tyler over. She said she needed help moving furniture. Lila had no reason to worry. Margaret was family. Trustworthy. Tyler texted, "GMA wants to chat. I'll swing by and help her move that dresser. Be home in an hour." He was never seen alive again. When police arrived the next morning, after Margaret's unnervingly calm 911 call, what they found wasn't an accident. There was no furniture moved. No blood trail suggesting a struggle. And no weapon in Tyler's hands. But there was a knife in the sink. And fingerprints. There was also a photo on the fridge. A Polaroid. Margaret. Tyler. Smiling. But Lila, who was originally in the photo, had been cut out. Literally. A jagged tear replaced her face. As if she'd never existed. Later, during the investigation, detectives uncovered Margaret's journals. They were disturbing. "He looks at me like no one else ever has. Lila doesn't appreciate him. She's too young. She doesn't know what love is. Sometimes I think he wants me too. He just doesn't know it yet." She described a fantasy wedding. A life together in a cabin by the lake. And worst of all, "If I can't have him, no one will." That single sentence, scribbled in red ink, was more than a delusion. It was a premeditated promise. Some believe Margaret was suffering from erotomania, a rare and dangerous delusional disorder in which a person believes someone is secretly in love with them, despite clear rejection or lack of interaction. Others argue she was lucid, manipulative, and simply couldn't accept losing control over the one thing she still had left in life. Tyler didn't see it coming. Neither did Lila. How could they? Who would ever suspect their grandmother, the woman who packed their lunches, folded their clothes, and smiled at every school play, was capable of something so dark, so final? Tonight, we dive deep into the investigation, the courtroom revelations, and the psychological profile of a woman whose love turned deadly. A woman who destroyed the family she once vowed to protect. A woman whose obsession ended with a single choice: a knife, a whisper, and a life taken too soon. This is the story of Margaret Trent. This is the story of Tyler Dawson. This is the story of how love can become lethal. This is Unravel True Crime. Margaret Trent was, by all outward appearances, the picture of a devoted grandmother. A retired schoolteacher, quiet, respected, known in her community for baking pies for church events and always remembering birthdays. But behind the porcelain smile and the floral aprons was a woman harboring a secret so disturbing it would unravel the very fabric of her family. She lived alone in a modest home in Ash Grove, Oregon. Ever since her only daughter died in a tragic car accident, Margaret had raised her granddaughter Lila as her own. Friends said they were inseparable. Margaret poured everything into Lila: her time, her attention, her future. Lila was her entire world, said one neighbor. After her daughter died, Margaret clung to that girl like she was her second chance at life. But the moment Tyler Dawson entered Lila's life, something shifted. Something dark. Tyler was everything a grandmother could hope for her granddaughter to find. Respectful, polite, ambitious. A 22-year-old college student with a disarming smile and aspirations of becoming a firefighter. He'd grown up just a few towns over. No criminal record. No enemies. He loved the outdoors. Volunteered at a local animal shelter. And he adored Lila. Margaret smiled when he first visited. Welcomed him with open arms. Baked his favorite cookies. At first she seemed genuinely happy. But over time, her warmth curdled into something colder. And much, much darker. Tyler's friends began to notice strange things. Late-night texts from Margaret. Gifts that felt inappropriate. A vintage cologne. A leather wallet. A hand-knit sweater, custom-sized. At first, Tyler brushed it off. Lila's grandma's just old school, he laughed, according to a friend. She waits outside the gym sometimes. She's just lonely. But loneliness isn't usually this calculated. Margaret began inviting Tyler over when Lila wasn't home. She'd claim she needed help moving something heavy, or wanted his opinion on what to cook for dinner. Always with a smile. And Tyler, polite to a fault, obliged. What he didn't realize was that he was slowly being lured into Margaret's fantasy. March 9, 2022. A date that would change everything. That afternoon, Tyler sent a short, casual text to Lila. GMA wants to talk. I'll stop by her place before I head home. Lila didn't think much of it. Why would she? It was just her grandmother. But Tyler never made it home. That night, Lila's texts went unanswered. Her calls went straight to voicemail. She assumed he'd lost signal. Or fallen asleep. But by morning, panic had set in. Then came the 911 call. At 7:03 a.m., emergency dispatch received a calm, measured voice on the line. There's been an accident, the woman said softly. He slipped. He's gone. It was Margaret. When officers arrived, they found Tyler's lifeless body sprawled across the kitchen floor. He had suffered 3 deep stab wounds to the chest. There were no defensive wounds. No broken furniture. No shattered glass. Nothing about the scene suggested a struggle. But something about Margaret's composure disturbed even the most seasoned officers. She was sitting on the porch, hands trembling faintly, but otherwise calm. No visible blood on her clothing. No tears. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She didn't cry for help. She simply looked at the officers and said, "He slipped. I tried to stop the bleeding, but he was already gone." But investigators weren't convinced, because what they found inside told a different story. On the fridge, taped neatly under a souvenir magnet, was a Polaroid photo. It showed Margaret and Tyler smiling together. But Lila, who had originally been in the photo, was cut out. Not digitally. Physically. A jagged tear where her image once stood. Almost like she'd never existed. Lead detective Lane Rogers was among the first to examine the scene. This wasn't an accident, he later told reporters. This was personal, calculated, and obsessive. And the deeper they looked, the more disturbing it became. Inside Margaret's bedroom, officers uncovered a small wooden box tucked beneath her bed. Inside was a lock of hair, later confirmed through DNA to belong to Tyler. Wrapped in silk, tied with a red ribbon. There were also printouts of his Instagram posts. Many underlined, some highlighted, with cryptic notes scribbled in the margins. And a diary. Not just any diary. This was a handwritten manifesto of delusion. Dozens of entries spanning nearly a year, all focused on Tyler. He's everything my late husband never was. He looks at me with kindness. Real love. Lila doesn't deserve him. She's too immature. Too selfish. One entry in particular stopped Detective Rogers cold. If only he loved me back. I know how to make it right. When prosecutors reviewed the material, they called in psychological experts. What they diagnosed was something rare and dangerous. Erotomania. A delusional disorder in which the afflicted person believes that another individual, often someone younger, more attractive and unattainable, is secretly in love with them. Margaret had convinced herself that Tyler's politeness, his smiles, his basic decency, were hidden signals of affection. She interpreted his awkward laughs as flirtation, his reluctance as shyness, his discomfort as passion he was too scared to act on. Tyler, according to all evidence and witness accounts, never once encouraged her. But to Margaret that didn't matter, because in her mind, he already belonged to her. Even more unsettling, forensic analysts determined that the knife used to stab Tyler was cleaned, then placed back in the kitchen block. Only a faint trace of blood remained on the handle. It was as if Margaret had planned not just the act, but the cleanup, the story, the aftermath. When questioned, Margaret refused to speak further. No confession, no remorse, just silence. And when shown the diary entries she wrote, she simply stared at them, then looked away. But the truth was already carved into the pages, into Tyler's chest, and into a family that would never recover. This wasn't a random act of violence. This wasn't a sudden break. This was a slow descent, a calculated delusion that blurred the lines between love and obsession, between care and control. Margaret Trent, the woman who once protected her granddaughter from the world, had become the very threat she was supposed to guard against. Coming up, the courtroom showdown, the testimony that shattered the jury, and Lila's heartbreaking words, as she faced the woman who destroyed both her past and her future. This is Unravel True Crime. The trial of Margaret Trent began on October 14, 2022, 7 months after the murder. The courtroom was packed. Locals who had once seen Margaret as a gentle, widowed grandmother, now stared at her like a stranger. She sat motionless beside her defense team, her hair pinned neatly, her eyes vacant. She never looked toward Lila. Not once. The prosecution's case was straightforward, but devastating. They painted a picture of calculated obsession, of a woman who, over time, blurred fantasy and reality, convincing herself that a young man, who showed her nothing but polite respect, was secretly in love with her. They laid out the evidence like puzzle pieces. The diary filled with romantic delusions and possessive rage. The hair lock kept like a lover's token. The edited photographs where Lila was cut out, again and again. And of course, the chilling final journal entry. If I can't have him, no one will. Lead prosecutor Angela Murray didn't mince words in her opening statement. This was not an accident. This was not a moment of confusion or panic. This was a woman who believed she was entitled to love that was never hers, and killed to preserve that fantasy. But the most heartbreaking moment came when Lila took the stand. Her voice trembled. She struggled to meet her grandmother's eyes. She described the moment she realized Tyler was missing. The panic, the dread, and the phone call, the one that shattered her world. I called her. My grandma. I was crying. I asked, "Have you seen him?" She said, "Something happened. Come home." She sounded calm. Too calm. Like she already knew he was gone. When asked if she suspected her grandmother could harm Tyler, Lila broke down. Never. Never in a million years. She raised me. She tucked me in at night. She made me soup when I was sick. And then she took him away. The defense tried to argue diminished capacity. They claimed Margaret suffered from delusional disorder brought on by prolonged grief and isolation. Her attorney called her a lonely, broken woman who lost touch with reality. They even brought in a psychiatrist who testified. She genuinely believed Tyler returned her feelings. To her, this wasn't stalking. This was love. But the prosecution pushed back, hard. They pointed to the methodical nature of the murder. The cleanup. The 911 call, rehearsed and emotionless. The erased text messages from her phone. This wasn't a psychotic break. It was a choice. The jury deliberated for just 5 hours. On October 28, 2022, Margaret Trent was found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge called it a disturbing betrayal of trust. A grotesque inversion of the role a grandmother should play. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She showed no visible reaction. But even after the verdict, questions lingered. Why hadn't anyone seen the signs? Were there other boundaries crossed that Lila didn't know about? One neighbor came forward during the trial, anonymously telling reporters, "I thought it was odd, the way she talked about Tyler. She said things like, 'He's too good for Lila. He needs someone more mature.'" Another recalled seeing Margaret hug him too long, or touch his arm when he looked uncomfortable. But no one thought to say anything. Because who would suspect the grandmother? Psychologists analyzing the case later said Margaret fit a rare and deeply troubling profile. Widowed, isolated, overly enmeshed with her dependent, and then fixated on a younger male surrogate for emotional fulfillment. They called it displaced romantic transference, when emotional attachment mutates into possessive desire. In the months that followed, Lila withdrew from public life. She moved away from Ashgrove, deleted her social media, left college. She was quoted once in a letter read at a victim impact hearing. "I lost my best friend. I lost the man I loved. But I also lost the woman who raised me. The person I trusted most turned into the monster I feared least." To this day, Margaret has never confessed, never explained why, never said she was sorry. Some believe she still clings to the fantasy that Tyler loved her, and that what she did was somehow justified. But others believe she knew exactly what she was doing, that when the fantasy collapsed, she destroyed it, and everyone inside it. Pause. Then slower, softer tone. There's something haunting about a betrayal that comes from within your own blood. From someone who was supposed to protect you, not punish you. Margaret Trent wasn't a stranger. She wasn't a monster hiding in the shadows. She was family. And maybe that's the darkest part of all. Narrator, VO, slight build-up toward final hook. So now we ask you, was this a case of untreated delusion? Or was it cold-blooded jealousy cloaked in the mask of family? Was Margaret truly broken? Or was she dangerously aware? Let us know what you believe. Was justice truly served? Could this tragedy have been prevented? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story as disturbing and unforgettable as we did, subscribe, like, and hit that notification bell. Because next time, we'll unravel another story you won't believe is true. This is Unraveled True Crime.